Logically, can Baizhu be the first Archon of Wisdom? I'm not really weighing much on this theory, since I personally feel that the Archon of the Woods is going to be a lore NPC, kind of like Rustam and Kazuha's friend. But for argument's sake, let's say that the Archon of the Woods is going to be an in-game character. Well then, there's a strong chance that he could be Baizhu, due to two particularly simple details. One, Baizhu lives in Liyue, and two, he's associated with medicine. Now, before I lose any of you, let me explain my thought process. By now, almost everyone has concluded that Sumeru will be based off the ancient Persian Empire, and one of ancient Persia's most notorious works of literature is the Shahnameh, which Genshin Impact has used as a source for its lore on multiple occasions. Don't believe me? Just check out Rustam, a key character in Mondstadt's history, and Suneru's catalyst for turning into the Crimson Witch and joining the Fatui. But Rustam is also the name of a hero in the Shahnameh who goes through 7 labors, and then ends up killing his son because Ahriman was getting bored. Surprisingly, that's the plot of 99.9% of stories in the Shahnameh. Or even Zhongli's familiar Ejda gets his name from the Persian word for dragon, Ejdaha, and a frequent featured antagonist in many of the Shahnameh stories. Ijdahas are thought, or at least in the Shahnameh, they're believed to be lizards and snakes who have consumed too much evil and have grown too big in size. There's categorically 3 kinds. There's air dragons or air Ijdahas, water Ijdahas, and ground Ijdahas. The ground one is the one that's most commonly encountered throughout the stories, as it's the one that dwells in caves and hides treasure or decides to burn down random villages because it was bored. Also, the powers of the Ijda in the Shahnameh vary. Some can breathe fire, some can breathe water, some can control air. Again, it varies from story to story. Either way, this further proves my point that MiHoYo is going to take a lot of inspiration for its Sumeru characters from myths from ancient Persia and its satraps. Satraps, for those of you who don't know, were territories owned by the Persian Empire who didn't technically have the same belief system as Persia. You see, when the Persian Empire took over a country, it never forced them to change their views or their beliefs. They could do anything they wanted. They just had to recognize the Persian king as their official king. Examples of this are Egypt and India, the 2 biggest examples I can think of. Either way, need more proof of this theory? Just look at Sino's Anubis-inspired outfit, or Vahid the shopkeeper who sells the Anaita blessing. Both are clear-cut references to ancient Persia and its territories. But I digress. Let's go back to the Baizhu theory. Let's say we need some piece of evidence tying in Mr. Herbalist to Sumeru's God of the Woods. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I present you with the story taken straight from MiHoYo's biggest lore contributor. And that's the story of Jamshid. No, not Yamshid, as many English-speaking folks tend to call him, but Jamshid. Now, Jamshid isn't really a deity in the Shahnameh, but he's done so much for the Persian Empire and comes up with so many inventions that the people of ancient Persia actually start to believe that he may be a descendant of Ahura Mazda. For those of you who don't know, Ahura Mazda was the king of the gods in the ancient Zoroastrian pantheon, kind of like Odin and Zeus. But instead of being associated with strength or lightning or thunder or the sky, he was mostly associated with wisdom. Now, being considered one of Ahura Mazda's descendants is the greatest honor any mortal can have, at least back then it was. But for Jamshid, this isn't good enough, and so he decides that he wants to be worshipped above Ahura Mazda. Now, before I get into the rest of the story, let me explain the inventions that Jamshid came up with. I think you'll find one in particular very interesting. The list goes as such: the making of armor and weapons, dyeing clothes made from linen, silk, and wool, the construction of houses using bricks, I assume before this everyone lived in tents, the mining of jewels and precious metals and turning them into ornaments, such as crowns, bracelets, necklaces, etc., the making of perfumes, the making of wine, water navigation, for sailing and other obvious reasons, and most importantly of all, the art of medicine. That's right, Jamshid's biggest contribution to society was his discovery of multiple medicines and other arts of healing. And wouldn't you know it, but Baizhu owns Boo Boo Pharmacy, and has a reputation of being the best doctor in Tevat. He's also known as a specialist in traditional herbal medicines, which would all tie in nicely if he was inspired by Jamshid. I mean, if you are the literal creator of something, chances are you're gonna be an expert on the matter. Also, note how all of Baizhu's medicines are herbal, meaning they come from plants and trees, which could tie in with him both having a Dendro vision as well as being the Archon that oversees plants and herbs. Now, let's continue our story, shall we? As Jamshid starts to ascend into an imaginative state of godhood, his actions become more and more abhorrent. He orders all statues of Ahura Mazda to be replaced with his own. That all offerings should be made in his name instead, and later on his ego inflates so much so that he forbids the worship of any other deity from the Zoroastrian pantheon. Now, obviously, these actions have a domino effect of catastrophes in the universe. The most concerning would be that a certain all-evil creature by the name of Adiman gets a super big power boost and starts to cause mischief, which then leads to a certain serpent king named Zahok to rally the Iranian people and start a rebellion against Jamshid. Spoiler alert, they succeed. With nowhere else to go, Jamshid flings himself into the ocean, although iterations of this do vary, and eventually washes up on the shores of China, where he remains for 200 years, before he's eventually discovered by Zhao's thieves and sent to be killed at the hands of the totally evil Serpent King. Moral of the story? Having a literal god complex can kill you, along with a lot of other horrific reactions. What's funny is that Baizhu also happens to live in Taibot's China equivalent, Liwei, and he's been there long enough to open a grand pharmacy and give himself a reputation as a renowned pharmacist. I'm also going to go out on a limb here and say that Baizhu's quest for immortality could be a reference to Jamshid's obsession with wanting to be an immortal god. So, could all this mean that Baizhu is really the old god of Sumeru and that he's hiding in Liwei from something or someone? Well, yes it could. Before I finish this video, I'd like to leave you with one more detail. Although I can see Baizhu being the god of the woods, and also being based on Jamshid, I'm pretty sure that as the Sumeru story proceeds, we're going to see a lot of similarities between the god of the woods and the three other predominant deities from ancient lore. Those three being Ahura Mazda from the Zoroastrian pantheon, Shiva from Hinduism, and Ammon from ancient Egyptian mythology. Stay tuned for a later video if you want to hear that theory in full. Well guys, that's all for today. By the way, this is my first ever YouTube video, so if you liked what you see and you want to see more theories and historical facts, then please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends. This is Jeannie signing off. Bye!